The snowstorm howled through the mountains, its icy breath clawing across the land like a beast hungry for warmth. Beneath that relentless sky trudged a woman, her clothes thin and torn, clutching a bundle to her chest. A child, motionless, wrapped in a gray blanket. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her lips blue from the cold, and every step she took left behind both footprints and hope. Her name was Clara May, a widow who had lost everything when the winter came early and cruel. Her husband had died last spring in a logging accident, and the mountain cabin they built together now stood empty, haunted by memories too painful to bear. For 2 days she had walked through the wilderness searching for help, for mercy, for someone who might listen, but there was no one. Just snow, silence, and the bitter weight of loss. As night fell, a dim orange glow appeared through the storm. A cabin, tucked against the cliffs with smoke curling weakly from its chimney. Clara staggered toward it, half crawling, half carried by sheer will. When she reached the porch, she knocked weakly, whispering through chattering teeth, "Please, help me." The door creaked open, and there stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and piercing eyes, and the kind of man who looked carved from the very mountain itself. He held a lantern, its glow revealing the sorrow in her face and the small bundle she cradled. "My name's Eli," he said slowly, his voice deep and cautious. "What happened?" Clara's lips trembled as she spoke. "My baby. He's gone. Please, kind sir, I need someone to bury my child." For a moment the mountain man said nothing. The wind howled through the cracks, and Clara thought he might turn her away. But instead Eli stepped aside and said, "Come in." She hesitated, then crossed the threshold, feeling warmth for the first time in days. The cabin was simple but strong, built with care. A fire burned in the hearth, casting flickering light on wooden walls lined with animal pelts and tools. Eli poured her a cup of hot broth and handed it to her without a word. She drank slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. He knelt beside her and carefully lifted the blanket. His eyes softened as he saw the still, peaceful face of the child. "I'll help you," he said quietly. "But not tonight. You need to rest." Clara shook her head. "Please. He deserves to be buried before the next dawn." "I promised him I would." Eli looked at her, fragile, trembling, yet fierce in her mother's grief, and he understood. He fetched a lantern, a shovel, and an old wooden cross. Together they stepped out into the storm. The snow burned their skin, but they pressed on. Under an old pine tree that stood against the wind, Eli dug the frozen ground while Clara whispered prayers. When it was done, she knelt beside the small grave and placed her baby down gently. Wrapping him one last time, Eli stood silent beside her, hat pressed to his chest, the storm swirling around them like heaven itself weeping. When it was over, Clara sank to her knees, exhausted and broken. Eli knelt beside her, placing a heavy coat over her shoulders. "You're not staying out here," he said firmly. "You come back inside or you'll freeze too." She didn't resist. Inside the cabin, by the fire's glow, she finally allowed herself to weep, long, hard, and without shame. Eli didn't speak. He just sat beside her in silence, the kind only those who've known loss can share. That night, as the blizzard raged outside, the widow and the mountain man sat side by side, two souls bound by grief, and something neither of them yet understood was beginning to stir between them. Morning broke cold and silver. The storm had passed, leaving the mountain wrapped in quiet white. Clara awoke to the crackle of fire and the smell of coffee. Eli was already awake, chopping wood outside, his breath visible in the crisp air. She stepped out, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, and for the first time truly saw the man who had helped her. His hands were scarred, his eyes heavy with a sadness that mirrored her own. "You didn't have to do all that," she said softly. Eli looked up, his axe pausing mid-swing. "Didn't have to," he replied, "but I reckon I was meant to." Over the next few days, Clara stayed in Eli's cabin. She needed warmth and strength. But what she didn't expect was the way Eli's silence brought her peace. He didn't pry or pity her. He simply shared what little he had. When she tried to leave, he told her the truth. "There's no path safe enough yet. Snow's still deep. You'll stay till spring." And so she did. As days turned to weeks, they began to talk. Not about loss, but about life. She learned that Eli had once had a family too. A wife and a son, both gone to sickness 2 winters past. He had buried them beneath the same pine tree where he had laid her child. "That's why I built my home here," he said one night by the fire. so I'd never be far from them. Clara's heart ached. The man who had seemed as hard as stone was, in truth, just another soul-surviving heartbreak. In time, they found small reasons to smile, sharing meals, fixing tools, or watching the sunrise together over the peaks. The pain never fully left, but it began to soften. One morning, Clara placed a small carved wooden angel by the graves under the pine. "For your boy," she whispered. Eli said nothing, but his eyes glistened. That night, for the first time in years, he prayed aloud, not just for his lost family, but for hers, and for the courage to live again. When spring arrived, the snow melted away and the mountains bloomed with new life. Clara knew it was time to leave. She thanked Eli for everything. But as she stepped toward the trail, he said, "You could go, or you could stay. No one's meant to live alone in these hills." She looked back. The man who had buried her pain with her child, who had given her hope when the world gave her none, and she realized home wasn't always where you came from, but where someone waited for you. Clara stayed. Years later, travelers passing through those same mountains would tell stories of a woman and a man who lived in a cabin near the old pine, where the graves were tended with care and flowers always bloomed. They said the mountain man had once been silent and cold, but after meeting a poor widow in the snow, his heart had learned to speak again.